Story 1. I can hear them, so before I say anything, I need you to understand something and make a promise. I know what I'm about to say is gonna make you want to throw me into a nut house, and I can't blame you, I get it. But first I need you to know that I wouldn't be telling you this if I wasn't desperate, and I need you to promise to hear me out. Okay, I can hear things, bad things. It first became apparent when I was 6, right after my dad left my mom, my sister, and I for another woman. It really hit us hard. My mom had to get a job to support us. We had to get on food stamps, and I didn't realize it at the time. She started taking money out of her retirement fund. We sold the house we were living in and moved a couple states away because she couldn't stand to be anywhere near there. I'm sorry, getting off topic. They started out as nothing but whispers, small noises that I could pretend I didn't hear whenever I asked if others heard, and they said no. I just kept my mouth shut. I don't like drawing attention to myself. It took a couple years before the whispers started making sense. By then, I was 8 or 9, maybe 10. I don't remember, but I do remember the day it happened, like it was just 5 minutes ago. I was in the living room with my sister watching TV when I heard them. At first, they were the mumbles I was used to, and I could ignore them, but they slowly started making sense. Started actually making words. It's no wonder he left you. Why would he stick around for someone like you? Immediately, I knew it was talking about my dad, and the words felt like a punch to the gut. Tears sprang to my eyes, and I was about to yell back at it. But its next words hit me even harder, hard enough to steal my breath. He has a better wife now, one better than you. Besides, how could he love you? A sniveling little girl who didn't even have a job, constantly begging for attention. Pathetic. At first, I was confused, but when I looked around for the source of the words, my eyes landed on my mother, and I could see it immediately. I could see past her smile, past the little tune she hums when doing the dishes. I could see the pain in her eyes, and I knew those were the thoughts going through her mind. Now, understand, I can't read minds. That's not what this is. I can just hear people's demons, if that makes sense. I know everyone's doubts and anxieties because they're broadcasted to me, and I can't stop it. It got worse as I got older. At first, the voices came only every once in a while and kept to people I hung out with. But then they got louder, broader, and soon I could hear everyone. It is exhausting, terrifying. It drives you insane. Just this constant thrum of darkness and pain, choking you, and you can't get rid of it no matter what you do. It hurts, and it's sad, and you just want to give up. There was, a time where I was willing, to give up, especially after I started seeing their manifestations. Thick, black clouds of oil sticking and hanging to people. They clung like a disease, weighing the person down while it whispered its poison into their ears. Some were bigger than others, but everyone had one if they were over the age of 9 or so, and their eyes inhuman, blood-red pools that bore into me. They knew I could see them. It was nauseating. I just wanted it to end. I avoided everybody all the time, as much as I could to keep the voices at bay. It was lonely, but it was better than having to hear those goddamn voices all of the time. I needed to end it, but I was too much of a coward. I could never actually bring myself to. I am sorry. Just give me a second. I eventually ended up married after I learned to deal with everything, and we had a daughter. My little girl, the light of my life, so sweet and innocent, with no doubts or fears. She is my one solace, my one pride, and my reason for living. She's 6 years old now, and that's why I'm asking for help. That's why I need you to listen to me, to believe me. I don't care what happens to me, but a couple days ago, she came up to me and asked why there's a black cloud clinging to me. Story 2. The Autopsy of Cole Ryder. Cole Ryder, aged 23, death by multiple lacerations to chest, reaching as deep as his lungs. Poor bastard looks like someone cut him open multiple times with a damn sword. No visible signs of struggle, indicating that he was either drugged beforehand or was hit unexpected. The coroner recorded, working together with the officers to try to piece together the final moments of Cole's moderately short life. Cole's lifeless, blood-drained corpse lay flat on the autopsy table, with the ribbons of flesh hanging loosely. Even before the coroner began his work, he was approximately 5'11" tall, short brown hair, average build, with no tattoos or piercings. The average kind of guy you could walk past every day on the street and never take a second glance at. To society, he was just like everyone else, an invisible person with an unimportant life. How can people do this to each other? The coroner questioned aloud while removing Cole's rib cage. As he was about to make an incision to remove the lungs for closer examination, something caught his eye. He placed a hand just under Cole's shredded left lung and produced a bloody, airtight plastic bag. Removing the bag and emptying its contents onto a nearby sterilized desk, produced a USB stick, simply labeled "Play Me." Breaking from the procedure, the coroner ran out of the room to the two officers working on the case, handing them this strange new piece of evidence. "Continue the autopsy. We'll find out what this is about," instructed one of the officers. They turned to leave, rushing to the nearby police station to check the contents of the USB. "We'll be back shortly." The coroner re-sterilized and once again entered the room to continue working on Cole's corpse. Taking up the scalpel, he continued where he had left off, about to remove the lungs. At the police station, the two officers loaded up the USB and checked the files. There was one single audio file entitled "Current Number." Opening the file, they could hear a voice, though it sounded slightly different than a human voice. It sounded more raspy and cruel, almost animalistic, though still in English. 11,842. The voice kept repeating, as if trying to memorize the number. "What the hell is this?" asked the first officer. The second simply shrugged, and they closed the file down. Strangely, however, there was now a second audio file on the USB titled "Update. By the time you return, the number will be 11,843. It was the same inhuman voice, scratching through the speakers. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" the second officer asked the first. The first shook his head violently, and a chill air passed through the room. "I think perhaps we should return to the coroner's office," suggested the second. Upon re-entering the coroner's office, the metallic, sickly smell of blood wafted through the air, and a strange laugh could be heard from the autopsy room. Drawing their handguns from their holsters, the two men kicked open the autopsy room door to a scene straight out of anyone's worst nightmare. There was more blood than paint on the walls, and the coroner was completely missing, except for the pair of eyes slowly rolling across the floor. Cole Ryder still lay motionless on the autopsy table, chest cavity still open and face still lifeless, though he was now caked in the coroner's blood. Walking slowly around the room, the two officers stopped either side of Cole's body, surveying everything and drawing their guns, ready to unload upon the next thing that moved. Some sick fuck had obviously done this, and the officers did not care to be the next two victims. A spine-chilling animalistic laugh filled the room, reverberating off all the walls, making it impossible to tell where the sound came from. Originally more fresh meat, the voice exclaimed, and both men were impaled by large, sword-like claws. Cole sat up, withdrawing his bladed hands from the officers' chests, then using his razor phalanges with utmost precision, neatly cut out the sets of eyes from the now lifeless men, changing the scalpel-like protrusions from his fingers to blades like large hacksaws. He then tore at the bodies, ripping them to pieces and splattering even more crimson stains over the walls. Taking up the pieces of flesh that were now scattered around the room, he started placing them into his own chest cavity and lungs, which, while still exposed and cut open, seemed to take on a life of their own. Thrashing around like wild animals, they consumed the raw human meat. Once he was done completely consuming the bodies, he retrieved his rib cage and pushed his chest back together with the sickening crunch of bone on bone, deleted the recording of the autopsy from the audio recorder, ticked it up, and casually walked back out into the world, speaking over and over into the recorder. 11,845. Story 3. The Frozen Lady on My Bed. This really did happen to me, and although I'm not haunted by the memory, it still freaks me out, and I'm pretty much out of rational explanations. I don't know if this is going to be freaky to any of you, but I can tell you that my irrational paranoia of the dark worsened after this. So, as a kid, I was always afraid of the dark, and I still am. However, it was a pretty insane fear when I was younger. I didn't really believe in ghosts or whatever they're correctly called, and I still am skeptical now. But this one prominent incident has made my perspective change from on the fence to experienced. I was 8 years old, and every night was a struggle for me to go to sleep. I would get scared of every little noise, and if I was fast asleep I would wake up from every little noise too. I used to have a single bed that was placed directly in front of my door, which I always leave open when I sleep. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and just sitting upright with my legs still stretched out, though, and rubbing my eyes. Obviously, my room was pitch black and I couldn't see anything. However, this time I did see something. After rubbing my eyes, I was surprised to find what I automatically assumed was my mother sitting at the end of my bed. The reason why I assumed it was my mother was because it had the same curly hair, wore the same type of pajamas that my mother would wear, and wore glasses, like my mother always did. However, she looked extremely pale, and more like the color of a dead corpse that you'd find in an ocean. She was not facing me, but I could see her side portrait as she was sitting extremely still and silent and facing another wall. Obviously, I had no clue why she was just sitting at the end of my bed in the first place. Being the considerate child I was, I asked her what was wrong. She did not blink once, and she did not move at all. She was still facing the other wall, and I immediately got a bit heated as I thought my own mother was ignoring me. So I asked her the same thing and got the same response. I reached out to her thigh and tapped it, trying to get her to face me, and at the same time I touched my mother. I asked her again what was wrong, but I received a response I did not expect. As soon as I touched her, she whipped her head around me extremely fast and faced me with wide eyes and stared at me with her mouth gaping. Then she started screaming while jumping off the bed and pulled my arms off of her. I obviously screamed from instinct and tried to bring the covers over my body to protect myself. I then heard footsteps from the hallway and faced the door in my room, and the lights turned on, and it was my mother with a scared face, and she asked me worriedly why I was screaming and what was wrong. I just sat there, shocked. I looked around my entire room, and the thing that I thought was my own mother wasn't there. I told my actual mother that it was nothing and tried to get back to sleep, but I obviously couldn't. Many years later, my mother and her sister were looking through old photos of their lives, and I decided to sit with them. The house that I lived in when that incident happened has been there long before I was born, and my mother had in fact growing up lived next door to it while it was being built, and she wasn't the first owner. My mother was telling me about the times when this house was being built and who the first people who lived in it were. They were a mother and daughter, and they both died too early. The mother died of cancer, and the daughter died in her young adult years from a drug overdose. My mother then showed me a photo of the daughter. Her name was Rachel, and I remember a terrible feeling forming in my stomach. I took the photo from my mother's hands and looked at the photo more closely. Curly hair, glasses, but this time she wasn't in pajamas, but in casual clothes. It was her, the woman that was on my bed. It looked exactly like her, and that incident that happened when I was 8 will make me always remember her face. I don't know how Rachel, if it even was her, got into my room that night, or if I even fully believe that it was a spirit or anything. But someone was there, whether human or not. I saw her, felt her, and heard her, and I will not believe that it was my imagination. Story 4. Self-preservation. The next thing I heard about it was when I got home from the pub and turned on the late-night news. I was just in time to catch a breaking news article. The worried-looking reporter informed me that almost everyone who had been in the vicinity of Mississippi when the meteor went down had been hospitalized. Their symptoms were similar to those that a corpse experiences during decomposition. 10 people had already died, mostly the elderly and the very young. Scientists and geneticists from all over the globe were working frantically to try and find a cure. Being smarter than the average bear, I gathered some supplies and prepared for an epidemic. Years of being paranoid beyond reason was finally about to pay off. The news the next day had a lighter tone. A Chinese scientist had worked out that the meteor had contained an alien strain of bacteria that slowly broke down flesh tissue. The scientist also remarked that the bacteria were only affecting humans. He had also worked out that if a victim consumed a living being, such as an insect, it would delay the progression of the bacteria, giving the scientist more time to figure out a permanent cure. Anyone who thought they may have contracted the infection was to eat as many live creatures as they could. The reporter also explained that the U.S. Army was attempting to contain the infection. They failed. Anyone who has read Stephen King's book, The Stand, will have an idea of how the bacteria made its way around the world. It passed through the air, but to catch it, you had to be near someone infected, because the symptoms took between 3 to 5 days to kick in. People didn't realize that they were infected. In a week, Victus Sum's disease, as it had been named, was global. I had barricaded myself in my house with towels and blankets stuffed into every crack. I had the TV tuned to the news all day and night. The scientists had not predicted that the bacteria would adapt to the infected people's efforts at trying to keep it at bay. Victims all over the world were claiming that the insects were no longer working. People were starting to catch small mammals and eat them. As the days went by, people were slowly eating larger and larger animals. The first reported case of cannibalism was, ironically, the last broadcast made. The anchorman's hair was falling out and he was missing 3 teeth. He nervously told America that there had been a reported case of cannibalism in southern Europe. He also said that there would be no further broadcasts. All survivors were to lock themselves in their house and not let anyone in. For the next week and a half, I watched the infected shamble up the street, knocking on doors. One of my neighbors, a couple of houses down from me, was stupid enough to open the door. 3 people dragged him out and started biting his flesh. They started with his arms and legs, trying to keep him alive for as long as possible. They were crying as they ate. Their meal was shrieking in pain, and the 3 people eating him were apologizing furiously through mouthfuls of his arm. I don't think they were unable to control themselves. It looked more like they were disgusted by what they had to do to stay alive. They tried to break into my house 5 or 6 days later, but my barricades held. They were outside, begging me to let them in. Just one bite, please. Be generous. I listened to their pleading all night, too scared to sleep. I suppose I should explain why I'm writing this. I'm infected. Yesterday I coughed and lost a canine. I spent the night pulling out my teeth, easing them out one by one. It didn't hurt. They just slid out, like pulling up carrots. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm infected. The bugs have stopped working, and all the wild animals have long since run away. I have decided to lure someone into my house and attack them. It sounds so wrong writing that out, but I don't want to die. And I'm so hungry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ed to Bananakan, Story 5, Glass Gallery. Last week, when I was working my shift at the local museum, something happened to me. Something that can only be described as an unspeakable horror. I will try and recount it to the best of my ability. Although I already feel the shackles of suppression pulling on the memory, trying to bury it as down deep into my subconscious as possible. Maybe if I get this off my chest, I'll be able to get some sleep. I was at my post with a fellow co-worker. We were stationed in front of the brand new glass gallery. The gallery was only open for a week at our museum because it was a traveling collection. Needless to say, there was an implacable rush of people coming to see the pieces in the exhibit, and for right reason. I had never seen such impressive glasswork in my entire life. The last groups of viewers were making their rounds through the gallery on the closing night of the exhibit, and my co-worker and I were bidding them all a good night. Just as the last of the guests were exiting, a strange elderly man walked through the front door of the museum and approached us. He looked as though he was sobbing. His lower lip was trembling, his eyes were red and puffy, his voice was shaky and fragmented, but most peculiarly, he kept repeating the same damn phrase. "I'm so afraid I'm going to break something." It was difficult to make out what he was saying the first few times, between the whimpers, but he was like a broken record. He never stopped repeating that line. He moved slowly in a crooked, awkward sort of way. I tried to tell him that the gallery was closing up, and that he probably wouldn't have enough time to appreciate the pieces, but it seemed as though he didn't hear a word I said. He just kept sobbing his sad line and limped right on through the entrance to the gallery. I looked at my co-worker, and he just shrugged at me. I could hear the words "going to break something" fade as the old man walked deeper and deeper into the exhibit. After about 5 minutes, when every other patron had left, my co-worker said he was going to go check on the old man. At this point, he was the last guest in the gallery, and I think we both were a little concerned about a crooked old man alone amongst millions of dollars worth of art. Maybe he actually would break something. My co-worker disappeared, and I stood at the entrance for what felt like forever. Neither the old man nor my co-worker resurfaced. Confused, a little worried even, I decided to go into the gallery myself and see what was going on. I walked my path with slight pace, not leaving the pieces unnoticed. It really would be a shame if one of these were to break. They were gorgeous. I turned the corner and continued through the exhibit. I didn't see either my co-worker or the old man. I kept walking. There was one more turn in the gallery before it looped back around to the exit. As I approached a corner, I slowly started to hear sobbing. No, crying. My heart started to beat faster, and I noticed that I broke out almost into a run. The crying increased. The corner was about 5 or 6 feet away from me. There were no windows in the gallery, and the headlights had gone off. The only lighting in the entire corridor was that of those illuminating the individual pieces, baking them in an orange glow. Around the corner, a similar type of orange glow cast a shadow on the floor, and I could see the crooked silhouette of the old man. I remember thinking that he looked a lot more crooked than the first time I saw him, and then I turned the corner. Standing there, almost right in front of me, was the old man, crying harder than I remember. But there was something different about him. He wasn't repeating that phrase any longer. He was whimpering something else that I couldn't quite make out. I decided to look past him, and then I saw it. What was making that shadow on the floor? I saw my co-worker. He was lying on the floor. His face was in a freeze frame of anguish. But his back, it was snapped at a disturbingly unnatural angle. It looked like his spine had been severed in half. His legs were pointing in one direction, and his torso was pointing in another one entirely. He was quivering. Horrified, I looked away, unable to conjure a single word. I then heard what the old man was saying between his bouts of tears and breathlessness, between his cries and wails. The words he was now saying were, "I did it. I broke something." Story 6. Clickety-clack. There was a family of 5, a mother, a father, and 3 daughters. The daughters' names were Jennifer, Jade, and Janine. Their father was a carpenter, their mother unemployed. The eldest daughters often excluded Janine from their group, so one day she ran crying to her father, feeling sorry for her. That night he fashioned a wooden doll. It had a small pointed nose, a purple dress, and woolen hair. When he presented the doll to Janine, she fell instantly in love with it. Janine brought the doll with her everywhere she went and slept with it every night. But Janine inevitably grew up. She started to lose interest in her old toys, and eventually the doll ended up behind her wardrobe. It spent years there, discarded and forgotten, until one night, not so long ago, Janine, now age 10, was sleeping in her bedroom. She turned in her sleep, thinking she heard a nose, but dismissed it. After all, the nose became louder, and now Janine could hear it clearly. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. She sat up in her bed and noticed her old wooden doll on the floor, but it had changed. It was standing on its stumpy little feet, all on its own. Its face was distorted into a sick smile, and it was holding something in its hands. It gave a leap and landed on Janine's chest. She shouted, but the sound was cut short as the doll plunged a dagger through her throat. When Jennifer walked into Janine's bedroom the next morning to wake her, a terrible sight met her eyes. Janine's face was a bloody, gory mess. Her bed was splattered with blood, and she had her old wooden doll gripped in her rigged hands. A dagger lay on the floor. Jennifer let out a scream, and soon the house was full of policemen and family. Everyone mourned the loss of Janine that day, and soon only the family was left in the house. That night they cried themselves to sleep in their separate rooms. As Jade slept, she felt that somebody was watching her. She looked around her room through eyes that were blurred with tears and spotted the old wooden doll outside in the hallway. She turned over in her sleep, trying to sleep away her pain, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. She sensed the doll before she felt it. It landed with a thump on her legs and took out a long, sharpened blade. Jade screamed as the blade pierced her legs. The doll ripped out tendons from her leg, and she writhed in agony. Her father burst into the room, shotgun ready. The doll took another long knife from its back and hurled it with extreme accuracy. The knife jammed itself into the father's heart. He was dead before he hit the floor. She dragged herself to the door, desperately trying to escape, but the doll was too quick. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. It was over to her in seconds, driving a blade through her eye and into her brain. The doll ran through the hallway, the smile still plastered on its demonic face. The mother woke with a start, seeing a face leering over her own. She thought it was one of her daughters or her husband, but as her vision cleared, she could clearly see the wooden face. Her life was over before she even had a chance. Jennifer woke up to the squeal of her mother. She walked out of her bedroom door to find the bloody figures of her father and her sister on the floor, bathed in moonlight. They were, and moving. As she approached her parents' bedroom door, Janine's wooden doll ran out, clutching a knife and a large section of her mother's scalp with hair still attached. Jennifer turned and ran, with the rhythmic clickety-clack following in her wake. She flung open the door of the garage and headed to her father's workbench. She grabbed a saw, turned, and dived for the doll. The doll backed up in surprise, and Jennifer tried hacking off its head. This only infuriated the doll even further. It let out an inhuman scream of fury and latched onto Jennifer's face. It pulled her eyeball out slowly and painfully. She screamed in protest, but to no avail. The doll cracked her skull open and tore out her brains. It hopped out just as her body fell, all life drained out of it. Story 7. Who's that? My basement has never exactly been a welcoming place. It's unfurnished. There's no carpet, and the walls consist of boring, exposed bricks. There's a set of old wooden stairs on one end that creaks whenever anyone uses them. Behind the stairs is a storage area that begins about 4 or 5 feet off the ground and goes maybe 15 feet further back underneath the garage. The place is a dump as my brother never cleans it, and toys and tools and random things are sprawled out across the entire basement floor, and that's an accomplishment considering how huge it is. It's not very wide, but from one end to the other it's at least 80 feet in length, including the storage space. However, it is not easy to see from one end to the other since the water heater, furnace, and other appliances sit conveniently at the bottom of the stairs to make it impossible to carry large objects like the Christmas tree up and down stairs. Anyways, one night we had some friends over. By we, I mean me and my parents. They had a little girl with them, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and since my brother was elsewhere as usual, I wound up sort of babysitting this girl while the parents chatted over desserts or something. Since the basement had so many toys, I thought it was a good idea to take her downstairs to play. Upstairs was kind of boring for a kid her age. The first thing she did when she got down there was find a large box. We had just replaced our washing machine, so its ginormous box was just sitting in the middle of the basement floor. It was as if I had completely vanished as soon as she crawled into the box. She had entered her own little world, playing house or something. I tuned out for a while to check emails on my iPod while she entertained herself, and then she caught my attention. "Who's that?" she asked. I blinked. "Who's who?" I responded, confused. "That man over there, the man in black," she responded, completely straight-faced. "There's no one there," I told her. "That's because he went upstairs," she told me. At this point, I took the girl upstairs and sat with my parents for the rest of the evening, not saying a word about what she said. 2 years later, I had some friends over in mid-February. In Wisconsin, this means that if you were to go outside at night, you would be frozen solid in under 10 minutes. So me and my friends were stuck inside and went downstairs to investigate the haunted basement. I told them about the above story. In fact, there were 5 of us, including me and my cousin. I had a tape recorder to collect audio. My cousin had a digital camera, and the others were armed with flashlights because they wanted to turn off the lights reluctantly. So we pulled the strings to turn off the lights, and we sat there in the pitch-black basement. But only for a few seconds. A halogen light bulb began to flicker above my head. Almost immediately, I reach up to find that it was halfway plugged in, but still a coincidence. I hadn't even turned on the recorder yet, so I unplug the light and turn on my recorder and tell my cousin to do the same to his camera. It was past 11 o'clock at night, so it was silent. Absolutely silent. Several minutes passed. We even did that thing they do on TV where you just ask questions to whoever or whatever. There wasn't a single response. So it turned into a bit of a joke. We started making fun of the situation and felt pretty stupid. We laughed for a while. Finally, my cousin's camera gives a low battery warning, so we decide to take the last few minutes seriously. "Okay, I'm going to count down from 3, and then let's have it quiet again, my cousin says. 3, 2, 1. A few silent moments passed. My cousin's camera beeps and shuts off. I turn off my recorder. We go upstairs to listen to the footage. And that was that, of course. The footage was rather uneventful. We listened to the entire tape, and for the longest time we heard nothing but the sounds of our own voices until the end. Okay, I'm going to count down from 3, and then let's have it quiet again, my cousin says. 3, 2, 1. A few silent moments passed. My cousin's camera beeps and shuts off, but then in the half-second between the camera turning off and the end of the footage is a whisper. Don't leave. We all stared at each other, petrified. Who's that? One of my friends asked. The man in black, I told him. Bonus stories, story 1. Nightmares are reality. I had a nightmare earlier this week. I say nightmare, but I realize now it was more like a vision of the horrors yet to progress. I was alone in my house, like I am every day of the week, because my mom has to go to work. My best friend, Amy, was meant to be coming round for the day, so I sat in my room waiting for her. It wasn't long until I peered out my bedroom window and noticed her mom's car parked outside my drive. I then heard 3 loud, deliberate knocks on my front door. Assuming it was Amy, I proceeded to chuck my keys out of the window for her to unlock the door and let herself in. However, as the person I had let in was walking up the stairs towards my room, Amy was only just walking up my drive. I realized my fate and sat on my bed waiting to be confronted by the unknown entity. I began to cry, my heart pounding in my chest. The entity reached my bedroom door just as Amy reached the front. I heard her knock desperately and shout my name, as if she knew I was in danger. The doorknob for my room began to twist. Slowly it clicked open, and the door began to widen. I saw it, but it was not what I expected. I thought I would have witnessed a grown man with a weapon of some sort. But no, this thing was nothing of reality. This thing showed no compassion, no mercy. It just stared straight at me, as if right into my soul. I began to choke with fear. Still crying, it rose its long, skinny, shadowy fingers to its gray, thin, blood-stained lips and simply told me to shush. I was stricken silent with fear. I could still hear Amy's desperate bangs and calls of my name, but they seemed to be getting quieter, more distant. The entity was taking me away from reality, making me distance myself from sanity and the ones I love. It stepped further into my room, and I began to notice in more detail what the entity looked like. It wasn't much taller than me, though much skinnier, inhumanly skinny in fact. Its face was something not of this world, eyes non-existent, only deep black holes like gateways to eternal slumber and death, hair as gray as storm clouds that reached the floor and draped over each shoulder, covering most of its body. I could no longer hear Amy, whether she had given up, gone to get help, or if this was the work of whatever was now at the foot of my bed was unclear to me. It stared, just stared, and I stared back. In pure silence, it moved so quickly towards the side of my bed, as if it had jumped or teleported. It was now within reaching distance of me, its face less than 2 feet away from mine, but still, all we did was stare until its face seemingly began to melt, its whole face elongated, its lips disappeared and jaw opened wider and wider, revealing the most disgusting, rotting, sharp teeth. I realized this was it as the entity let out a shrill noise, nothing to ever be made by human, animal, or even machine, and lunged. From my neck I woke up. Like I said before, I said nightmare, but no, I realize now it was a vision, a warning perhaps, or maybe I was just made to be frightened before its arrival. Now, as the person I let in is walking up my stairs towards my room, Emmy is only just walking up my drive. I know it's time, I know this is reality, but there's no harm in wishing that I wake up again. Story 2. So cold, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Bartholomew Jackson, and I desperately need to get this story out by any means necessary. Your belief on the matter that follows is not required, but I would indeed appreciate it if you were to bear with me. I'm afraid I must inform you that your convictions on the paranormal may be challenged throughout my tale, but I assure you that all of it is quite true. I was born on the southeast side of the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky in a mining town that has long been abandoned since then. On the exact hour of my birth, a large portion of the coal mine on the outskirts of town collapsed. 57 men died that day, including my grandfather and 2 of my great-uncles. The reason for the collapse was undetermined and declared an act of God by the local church. As unimportant as this anecdote may seem, keep these facts in mind as we continue. Once I was released into my mother's care, our family packed up and headed to a cabin on the opposite side of the mountain range that was inherited from our family patriarchs and timely demise. A few uneventful days passed at our new home until the night of December 21st. It was an especially cold night. Snow was falling in legion outside and had all but blocked the road into the nearest town. My mother was cradling me in the crook of her arm while she slept, as per usual, and awoke to the sound of tapping. Attempting to rise and glance at the window, my mother found that she could move nothing more than her eyes, as I'm sure you can imagine this fact alone was terrifying. The tapping continued until her gaze found the source on the adjoining doorway that led into the living area. Was a set of fingers darker than the night around them, gracefully tapping alongside the wooden frame. Frozen in place, my mother flinched as the fingers slammed onto the frame with enough force to cause the wood to creak and groan. Time slowed to a halt as a tall, lanky figure stepped into her bedroom. Its body was entirely black, does not do it justice. The entity's form seemed to be the antithesis to light itself, except for the eyes. Luminescent glowing pools of amber regarded her dismissively and focused upon my tiny form. My mother fought against whatever force was paralyzing her with all her might at this point, but to no avail. It shimmered out of focus and reappeared, standing silently next to my mother, and hours, minutes, seconds, my mother cannot recall how long the entity stared upon my sleeping form. Suddenly the creature moved with incredible speed. Grabbing her arm, my mother shook involuntarily at this recollection when she told me, so cold, she said, and almost gently placed it on her chest, staring into her eyes. It waved an arm in the space above me, and the moonlight that had been streaming in through the windows was blotted out. At this point my mother blacked out and did not wake until the next morning. Finding herself able to move, she threw back the covers and checked to see if I was still among the living and without harm. I received a single scar from that night in the shape of a 5-pointed star. It has been 25 years to the day since that terrible night. Over the course of my entire life, I've been experiencing harrowing nightmares and hearing murmuring voices when I'm alone. The nightmares, and I'm starting to have holes in my memory. Whatever this is, I think I'm running out of time. Anyone with knowledge on pagan or satanic rituals, please contact me at bartjackson@omi, wathavevagerfelfoshly. And Story 3, Seinfeld Lost Episode, The Mason. There's a story about a lost episode of Seinfeld floating around the internet. The episode was supposed to air around season 6, but it was mysteriously cut. The official story about the episode was that it featured Elaine purchasing a firearm after being mugged, but many elements about this episode were never revealed until recently. NBC executives refused to officially report on the episode until the Seinfeld Season 6 DVD commentary. I have the tape, but as someone who works within NBC, unfortunately, I can't reveal my sources. I work at the GE building in Rockefeller Plaza, and I have access to their digital archives. That's as much as I can divulge. We also have the entire original Seinfeld series in multiple formats, including original reels and VHS tapes. I noticed an episode with the production code 607 was missing from the tape set, and it was relocated in a set of old newsreels. The replacement episode, The Mom and Pop Store, was filmed a season later to replace the missing episode. It is oddly titled The Mason. The episode starts out as normal with Jerry's apartment, but the camera is much more steady. Jerry walks out as though he's been drugged and remarks that all of his family and friends have been dying lately. His buzzer rings and it's George. George runs up, half crying, and tells Jerry he's seen something terrible. He's mumbling and stuttering for about 5 minutes until he can form a sentence. There are still pauses for humor, but there is no audience or laugh track. George informs Jerry that planes have crashed into the Twin Towers due to a terrorist attack on New York. Jerry turns on the news, and you can see modern footage of the 9/11 attacks, all pre-filmed several years beforehand. George says that isn't the worst part. Elaine and Kramer were in the towers at the time of the bombing. What proceeds is a graphic and explicit phone call of screaming and crying and Kramer saying that something terrible has happened and Elaine is dead. Kramer screams there's no air in the building and he's burning to death and that he's going to jump. The camera cuts to live footage of a man falling from the Twin Towers. George genuinely looks upset and says, "I'm sorry, Larry, but I can't go through with this." And he tries to walk off the set, but people stop him and push him towards the stage. He walks out Jerry's prop window, and you can hear him calling his agent. There's a lot of mumbling, and you can see candles being lit behind the stage. Jerry goes over to the bookcase and pulls it aside, revealing a ceremonial black table with candles, a dinner plate, and a strange box. There is a Masonic symbol against black cloth just outside where the fake stage window would be. Jerry says some weird things in a foreign dialect, and one out of the camera shows a poster of Barack Obama. This episode originally aired in 1995. The scene ends with Jerry waking up in bed as though it's all a nightmare. Kramer comes in and asks if Jerry has seen a lizard. Jerry laughs and says, We are the lizards, and the camera zooms. Slightly, his eyes become slivered like almonds. The tape is only 7 minutes long, and what proceeds is just 20 minutes of dead air. If you continue watching to the end, it seems there are 3 more news reports stacked on. The first is about an outbreak of swine flu, the second about a train bombing, and the third. Story 4. Let me in. Cot sat alone on her couch, shoveling popcorn into her mouth. She stared at her TV, tied to the suspense of the movie. The sky darkened as the sun approached the horizon. Hidden behind the ocean of trees her house lay among. One lone tree stood in the center of her yard, visible through the living room window. A menacing presence filled the area, yet to make itself known. Cot was glued to her movie, but still able to catch a glimpse of the black object aimed at her door. Thud. Cot jumped, startled by an unexpected disturbance, spilling the popcorn. What the hell? She whimpered, approaching the door. The doorknob was cold in her hand. Her heart pounded in her chest. The hinges squeaked as the door creaked open. A rush of cold air washed Cot's face as her eyes scanned the dim yard. Nothing could be seen. Nothing made a sound. She slowly shut the door, then cleaned up the popcorn. She had just sat down when another black object hit her door with a louder thud than before. She looked at the tree in the yard, almost certain she saw what threw it. Cot sat there watching the tree, waiting for something to happen. It's just some kids, she thought, nothing to worry about. She quickly made herself comfortable and began to turn on another movie. Minutes passed and another thud shattered the silence, shaking the door. Cot raced for the lock and quickly shut the blinds. They'll go away, she said, but grabbed a knife to calm her nerves and give her a sense of security. Tap, tap, tap. She heard light pecking on the living room window. The pecking grew louder, faster. She froze there in place, staring at the windows as the tapping became more profound. She was afraid to investigate, but brave enough to stand her ground. Her home was small and every hiding place would be too predictable. Besides, she didn't want to hide. She wanted to see it coming instead of cowering in fear. The tapping suddenly stopped. Cot slowly made her way to the door and put her back to it. A shadow eclipsed the light from the window atop the door. She stood just out of sight, holding her breath. With her back pressed against the wood, she could feel it knocking 3 times softly. Cot could hear the galloping beat of her heart in her head. Her anxiety raised to the peak. 3 more knocks hit the door, harder this time. Let me in, a hoarse whisper slipped through the door and into Cot's ears. She bit her lip, tears filling her eyes. Another 3 knocks erupted, furious now. Let me in, an angry voice ordered. The knocking didn't cease. It grew harder as the voice grew louder. Let me in, let me in, let me in. The knocking grew so fierce it could have shattered the door. Tears leaked from her eyes. What do I do? She thought. Should I open the door? The knocking was more than she could bear. I know you're in there, Cot, it said. Her stomach twisted, her breath caught in her throat, and tears now streamed down her face. Go away, she shouted finally. Let me in. It screamed in response. Leave me alone, she cried. The voice and the knocking echoed in her head, making her more nauseous than before. Reaching for the lock hesitantly, she sucked up her tears and held her breath, unlocking the door and throwing it open. Nothing was there. The tree stood in the yard unmoving. No wind, nothing. She shut the door, shaking in fear. With the click of the lock, the room grew cold. Goosebumps covered her skin. "Thank you for letting me in," a voice whispered behind her. Story 5. Want you? No, I recommend that you stop reading this now. Don't say you weren't warned. When I was younger, I would always get scared watching horror films and reading horror stories, just like everyone else. But as I'm sure lots of other people will tell you, the real horror sets in after seeing the movie or reading the story. You just experienced a story with some monster, demon, or other force, probably one that kills people the rest of the day. You are on your guard, especially at night. Every creak you hear, every flickering shadow, every slight sound in the darkness frightens you. When you are in bed at night, you hide under the covers and hope that you can just make it until morning, that the light of the sun will destroy any evil forces trying to harm you. When I was a kid, I would always try to stop my fear by thinking about one thing. Why would the monster attack me now? After I had seen a film or read a story, finding a monster's weakness, or at least how to identify and escape from it, I would have an advantage over the thing. If it had ever wanted to get me, it would certainly have come before I heard about it. Many years ago, in my small town and other surrounding areas, several kids went missing. There was no evidence, not a single trace of anything that could tell where they had been taken to, or who. What had taken them, however? One warm summer evening, a teenager about my age was admitted to the local hospital by his parents. They said he hadn't slept for days. The doctor recommended sedation, but the boy resisted violently. He said that it hunts you while you sleep, that it would get him. His parents and doctors questioned him about what it was. He refused to explain, warning that if he told the story, they would be next. After quite some time, the boy, exhausted, gave in and told them the same thing he had been told. For an unknown amount of time, years, perhaps decades, a monster has existed in this world. No one knows the original source of this thing, but it has been taking people ever since it first came into existence. It has attributes similar to some other monster stories. For example, it haunts your dreams. You dream that you are having a normal day, your normal routine, and then you see it off in the distance somewhere, and it just stares at you, yellow eyes, and a figure that you can't quite make out. The next time you dream, you are in an unfamiliar place, and it is very close to you now, and it begins to chase you. It is a large beast with a menacing growl and those unmistakable yellow eyes. You try to escape, but it just keeps getting closer and closer. Then you wake up. There are no accounts of the third dream, because that is when it gets you. You disappear, you're gone. There's nothing more to it. Well, there is one more thing, the most important detail. It only starts to haunt your dreams once you have heard of it. Once you have read this story, there is no escape. As soon as you finish this sentence, the next time you dream, you will see it off in the distance. The boy soon disappeared, as did his parents and his doctor. I just recently heard this story from a friend of mine, a friend who's now gone. Soon I will be gone too. My old strategy of why not, when I know what's coming, will no longer work. It attacks when you know. One more dream, and I will be gone. Before long, you will be gone too. Story 6. Karma. Have you ever wondered what would it be like to be dead? I'll tell you, it's not fun. My name is Rafina Kaitant, and this is the story of my death. 2 years ago, I was murdered on November 21st, 2015. To me, it felt like the best day of my life, but I didn't know it would lead to my last breath, as it all began 2 months before, when I just began to start school. Like any other story you probably have read or knew, I was the new kid, which meant that I had new neighbors and friends. I made friends fairly quickly, but I still don't remember why. I was a bitch, I had to admit. So it still haunts me that people liked me. It was surprising, but again, not everyone liked me. I am the type of person that will be loved on one side, but completely rejected on another. And there was one person who, well, seemed a bit off. You can even ask my living friends. The thing about this girl is that she was completely alone, literally. No one talked to her, so she talked to no one, which sort of confused me, because you have to talk to someone at some point. Seriously, what about group projects? But no, once again, loner. Now how I die was karma. I shouldn't have gone in her house and... Wait, that's right, you don't know yet, remember, what I said about her being a loner. Well, it turns out she was, I mean seriously. Her house was completely empty. Like, what kind of person would even want to be this alone? Well, except for one room. I presume it was her room, but something seemed off about it to me, and myself being a dumb, curious 14-year-old I was, wandered in, and what I saw was horrific. It still scars me to this day. Even when I'm in fucking heaven, it was so bad that she had to kill me because I saw this slaughterhouse. I had so many emotions about that. It was like I just paused in life because of the things I saw there. The bodies that were piled upon bodies upon bodies. It was like a sanctuary for dead people, a holding house for the deceased, and too many things to point out how they die. Okay, question for you. Imagine that you are walking home from school. Don't want to do your homework because you're a lazy fat ass, and you come across a creepy house that you think belongs to the loner school. Would you go explore the house and most likely be faced with the burden of death or be run the fuck away from that place before you fucking shit your pants? I, for one, thought option A was better. The last thing I think I should point out to you is how I die, and the way they did. After I went in the room to be an idiot and see what they look like, I saw how she killed people. It was not pretty. She basically smashes your head with a baseball bat, and while you're still unconscious, she ties you to a table with old weary stains for blood on it. It's out all of her murder machine tools for her to slice-o and dice-o you open, and then she does it so slowly to make you suffer, and once you're long gone, she removes all the bones in your body and weaves them together to make a quilt. But what I thought was most interesting is that she didn't do any of that. More like she was the victim, and the real murderer was me. Well, I guess that's karma. Story 7. Still here. When I was 7 years old, I awoke in the middle of the night. I ordinarily wouldn't have thought anything of it. It happened rather often. I would wake from nightmares and stay upright in bed for a short while before coaxing myself back to sleep. My parents had quite the tendency not to be caring or comforting, so I'd taken it upon myself to get myself back to sleep. However, tonight was different. When I woke, I immediately sat bolt upright in bed, scanning the room with my eyes widely, but unable to make out anything in the pitch black. I couldn't bring myself back to sleep, however exhausted I was. I got the haunting feeling that I was being watched. Slowly, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness that was blanketing my room. That was the first time I saw her. A young girl, probably about the same age as I at the time, was standing at the foot of my bed. She was pale and in a white nightgown, with long brown hair that flowed to the small of her back, and eyes quite literally the size of dinner plates. She stared at me. That's all she did. Not once did she move, blink, or speak a word. All she did was sit and stare at me. I opened my mouth to scream for my mom, but no noise came out, and I found myself completely paralyzed with fear, unable to run away. I wasn't certain how long she stood there at the foot of my bed, but eventually she faded away, and I cried out loudly in fear. My mom rushed to my room quickly, but she was too late to see the apparition, who had disappeared. For a month or so, I would only wake up to see her occasionally, just staring at me with her large eyes. Then it became a routine thing. I would awaken every night to her small form staring at me, and I would be frozen in fear until she decided to fade away. The experience never became any less frightening, even over the course of a year. Even after 2 years, she still haunted me every night. Never did her large eyes cease to terrify me out of my wits. By the time I was 10, it was driving me out of my wits. My parents didn't believe me when I told them about it, insisting that I was only having night terrors. The specter was pushing me to the breaking point. Then, all at once, she stopped coming in the night. I wouldn't wake up and see her anymore. Still, the experience had taken its toll. Every time I woke up, I was afraid I would open my eyes and see her again, but I never did. I was relieved that it was finally over, for years she left me alone. When I was 14, we left town and moved into a new home. It was much larger, much nicer, and more importantly, it didn't hold the terrible memory of the haunting I had experienced in our previous home. This new house was comfortable, and I didn't feel afraid. I had all but forgotten the little girl in her nightgown. The first night in the house, I went to bed and woke with an unsettling feeling. My eyes caught something glinting dully at the foot of the bed, and my heart skipped a beat. She was standing there at the foot of my bed, staring. As suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished again, and I never saw her again. The thing that still disturbs me is the fact that she appeared, even in her new home. It was almost as if to say, I am still here. You can't escape me.